Of course, of course. I was talking to Josh about how like the process of trying to find a place.
I know. It's all the stuff to get here, like actually takes lots of effort.
And even with Jerry, who's like, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. All right. Looking forward to this. I'll see you guys on Saturday.
Yeah, we a long time no see. At least 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah. I'll go. This is clearly the fun row.
Harry will be smoking during the proceedings.
Errol's got to put on his playlist.
Let me refresh this battery.
It's okay.
Sid, Reuven, yeah. Hey, Brigid, how are you? I sent you a note.
Yes.
How's everything going?
Very good.
Good.
Well, I mean, if someone goes legit, there you go.
Alex Boris I did not stay all 16 hours, so. Since then, no, I've been up to the, I've been, the last 2 years I've been in Hyde Park. I've been at the library like 5 times. Yeah, but my folks were visiting upstate. I mean, they had never, slip up there. I got one of the medals with Nancy Pelosi did, so I went to that. Really? You've never been on some like family? Alright, it's a, yeah, or maybe he's Franklin and his mother-in-law. Got it. Okay. Well, I'm really confused. You should do a presser on saying what the city should be doing about Trump's assault on social security.
So I really want to do both because my daughter was in this little video and my husband got off the dog was in so I wanted her to so we went but during the we were like in this little row.
Oh, that's great. I'm gonna open with that.
Like right up she was fine. Oh yeah.
We started 19.
1 minute to go. Good morning. Whoa, that's the hot mic. Good morning, everyone. I'm Harold Holzer, director of Roosevelt House at Hunter College, and I want to welcome Vital City, the CUNY Journalism School, all of our students from the Journalism School, from Roosevelt House, and from Hunter College, and 6 of the 2025 candidates for Mayor of New York to our stage here at the one-time home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, the place where the New Deal was created. It's no surprise that when FDR sold this house to Hunter in 1943, he sent Eleanor to represent him at the deed transfer ceremony. He was on a battleship, but that's a long story. She read a letter from the president and added thoughts of her own about her one-time residence, this building, which the college planned to transform into a safe gathering space for students of all nations, religions, races, one where hate would not be tolerated. When Eleanor finished, a loud, unmistakable voice was heard, echoing Mrs. Roosevelt's sentiments, but admitting that there were still a few people he hated: Hitler, Mussolini, and the fascists trying to conquer the world and kill his fellow Jews. It was none other than the 99th mayor of New York, Fiorello LaGuardia. Just a reminder of his outspoken audacity at Hunter as we welcome the candidates running to be the 111th mayor of New York. One more historical note. This is the house where President-elect Roosevelt, as I said, and his brain trust planned the entire New Deal during the transition after the 1932 election, including programs that, of course, we still prioritize today: low-cost housing, healthcare, public transit, economic development, and the social safety net. But relative to this morning's forum, and all but lost to history since, is what FDR called the New Deal on crime. Yes, there was a, quote, New Deal on crime, which called for a crackdown on organized crime, bootlegging, drug trafficking, and lynching, and the first ever proposal for federal gun control. Although Congress watered it down to cover only Tommy guns, you have to be a 1930s movie fan to know what Tommy guns are, and didn't tackle lynching at all. So we hope that this setting, that history, and this moment inform and inspire your discussion on public safety today. And with that, it's a pleasure to introduce the co-host for this morning's proceedings, the founder of Vital City, Liz Glaser.
Thanks so much. That was a fantastic history of the place that we're at right now. So thanks so much for that. And welcome to this Mayoral Forum on Public Safety in New York City. And thanks so much, again, to our partners at Roosevelt House and CUNY School of Journalism for sponsoring this event. We're particularly grateful to Errol Louis, who will be moderating the forum and who's been such an important and insightful and steady commentator on the city. And he'll be joined by his colleagues, Bergin of WNYC and Reuven Blau of the city. And all three have been just extraordinary leaders in helping New Yorkers understand what's going on in our city through their trenchant reporting and analysis. And this forum couldn't come at a more important or perilous time. This morning's news is filled with reports showing how at the federal level, leaders are driving the country off a cliff economically. And that, of course, is being felt in New York City and in Albany and in every domain, including public safety, and how to address a federal government driven by the id and ego of the president will be a true crucial test for the next mayor of New York City. And that mayor will have to pick up the pieces in a city where governance has been similarly chaotic. We've been treated to an extraordinary round of appointments and resignations of high-ranking public officials, too many after federal and state investigations and seizures, including searches in the executive offices of a previous police commissioner. And we have the spectacle of a mayor in the most public way possible, trying to trade the public good for personal advantage as he attempted to get federal corruption charges against him dismissed. The judge who dismissed the charges, not on the merits, said very directly, everything here smacks of a bargain. Dismissal of the indictment in exchange for immigration policy concessions. And addressing crime and disorder in a sustained way is a challenge in this swirling world of self-interest, because being effective is all about governance. And while the crime numbers this quarter are encouraging, we're still well above pre-pandemic levels. And all crimes, including what are considered minor crimes, harassment, misdemeanor assault, are on a troubling rise. And these are the kinds of things, the push, the punch, and the shove, that make New Yorkers jittery when they walk down the street or take the subway. So Vital City is dedicated to getting at the facts without fear or favor in a way that we hope will be helpful to any mayor, to every candidate, to all New Yorkers. And you can find our analyses, including our most recent work on subway crime at vitalcitynyc.org. And so thanks very much to you all for participating. And Errol, over to you.
Thank you very much, Liz, and good morning to all, including our audience that's joining us by YouTube. And this will all be online at vitalcitynyc.org. At the conclusion of this, I want to thank all of the candidates who did make it here this morning for joining an important discussion at an important time. I'm going to give the audience a little bit of what we've agreed to as far as the rules, and then we'll start the discussion. As is often the case, we're going to ask the candidates to confine their answers to about a minute or so, with about 30 seconds for rebuttals, depending on what the questioner at the time would like to do in order to manage the conversation. These folks have been through a lot of forums, and they know that these are just guidelines to help facilitate a good discussion. They also know that not every candidate will answer every single question. They have different ranges of experience, and they've all had different kinds of engagement with these issues. And so we're going to try and tailor our discussion as best as possible to draw out all of the ideas. I'm going to introduce our journalist questioners. Brigid Bergin is the senior reporter on the People and Power desk at WNYC. Reuven Blau is a reporter for the city with a special focus on criminal justice and the city's prison system. For the few of you who don't know these candidates, they're trying very hard to get to be known by all of you. Adrienne Adams, going from left to right, is the Speaker of the New York City Council. She has been since 2022, and a council member of the 28th District in Southeast Queens since 2017. Brad Lander is the incumbent New York City Comptroller, serving since 2022. He served as a city council member for 2 terms from the 39th District, which is Park Slope in Brooklyn. Jessica Ramos is a New York State Senator representing the 13th District that includes all or part of Jackson Heights and nearby neighborhoods. She's been there since 2019 and previously served as the Director of Latino Media for New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. Scott Stringer is a former city comptroller for 2 terms, former Manhattan Borough President for 2 terms, former state assemblyman from 1992 to 2005. Next to him is Whitney Tilson, an investor, philanthropist, and writer. He's the founder and former CEO of Case Capital Management. And Jim Walden is an antitrust and government law attorney, a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Eastern District. We're going to give you big blocks of time to each questioner to have a discussion, first about violent crime, assaults and shootings. We're also going to talk about disorder and quality of life. We'll have a discussion about jails and courts, and we'll also talk about policing and civil liberties. Let me introduce our first questioner. Brigid Bergin, take it away.
Can you hear me? Thanks, Errol. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks for our folks who are watching via Zoom and YouTube. As Errol mentioned, our first topic is violent crime. So in this section, we hope to learn more about why you think violent crime remains a persistent public safety concern, and then we'll talk specifically about crime on the subway. So this first question is for all panelists. According to analysis of crime data from our partners at Vital City, crime across almost all categories is down this year compared to 2024. But rates of violent crime, including murders, shootings, and felony assaults, remain well above pre-pandemic levels in 2019. So first, why do you think that is? And if elected on January 1st, what is your #1 strategy to disrupt that trend? Let's start with Speaker Adams.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the question. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I believe that we still have the violent crime issue, not that it's ever going to go away, by the way, but we are here largely because of syndrome that New York City has been in, and Errol just mentioned pre-pandemic levels. We have a issue with mental health illness. We have issues with homelessness. We have issues with systemic racism in areas that have been neglected, and there has been disparate inequity in certain areas. We have recycling violence in homes where victims of violent crimes have never been treated or have been treated as statistics and not as human beings that are in need of treatment. So what I have done is I've enacted the first trauma recovery centers in New York State's history, and that is going to work from the inside out. How do we stop these cycles of violence? We start treating people as human beings and stop dehumanizing them as statistics. We take a look at the trauma and we move them into therapy and therapeutic spaces where they can get help, where they don't have to continue to live out cycles of violence, but we can actually stop cycles of violence. Also, we need to take a look at those violence interrupters in our crisis management system. What are their needs? How can they better be organized to stop violence before it begins? They are very, very effective tools, and they work with NYPD. They work very, very effectively, but they need to be enhanced. They need to be heard. That's another organization that is out there as well that has been underfunded. We need a mayor that stops complaining and starts acting. We need a mayor that understands what the real problems are and actually does something about it. We need a mayor that is not distracted because of his own issues that have to do with public safety. We need somebody that is going to get out there and actually take a look at violent crimes from the inside out. And I believe that I am that person to do that.
Speaker Adams, thank you so much. Just for the other panelists, I'll remind you to keep things moving. We want to keep answers to about a minute. So, Controller Lander.
Thank you, Roosevelt House. Thank you, Vital City. Thanks to all of you for being here and helping us really focus on an issue in a thoughtful and data-driven way. The pandemic broke things in the social order and caused a real elevation of crime and mental illness, and just broke some things in our communities. And I've been honest on the campaign trail. I think progressives, myself included, were slow to reckon with that elevation of crime and disorder coming out of the pandemic. And we are paying for it both socially and politically. And it's critical to focus on and do something about. So I've laid out comprehensive plans for confronting the NYPD staffing crisis and dealing with gun violence and dealing with retail theft and dealing with hate crimes. But for my number one issue, I am focused on the subways and have made a commitment, the number one in my campaign, to end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness. We don't have to be a city where our mentally ill neighbors are living on subway platforms and the stoops of our buildings, a danger to themselves and too often to others. I like the Vital City approach to dealing with it, making sure it's clear that the subways are for transportation, that there's better coordination across agencies, that there's appropriate use of policing. But at the center, there has to be this model of housing first that connects people from the streets to housing with services. It works 70 to 90% of the time. That coordinated continuum of care will make our subways and our city safer for all.
Good morning, Roosevelt House. It's great to be back here at such a historic New York landmark to talk about the issues that are top of mind for New Yorkers right now. I think that in thinking about serious violent crime, our comp stat, for starters, could use a lot of modernization. If there was a way to distill between crimes that are random and those that are targeted, perhaps we could better inform our various approaches to ending both. Just this morning, one of the top stories on NYC was a man who had stabbed 4 children in his family, his own family, in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And we're seeing that crime against women is actually on the rise. So everything from socio-emotional learning and preventive measures to make sure that conflict resolution is a real tool that New Yorkers have is really important. But I think in the immediate, we want to make sure that we are catching the bad actors where possible. And I say that as someone who's born and raised in my district and has seen what Roosevelt Avenue has become over the past 40 years of my life. And I want to see the people who are really taking advantage of others have repercussions and there be accountability. So while we should definitely reopen a lot of the mental health institutions that former Governor Cuomo closed in order to deal with those who are struggling with severe mental illness on the subways and our streets, making sure that there's supportive housing, there also has to be real accountability. And I'm looking forward to striking that balance of justice and accountability so that we're keeping everybody safe at home and in our streets.
It's also great to be here with all of you today. Thank you, Vital City. Look, I grew up here back in the day in the 1970s when there were 2,000 murders a year. When I took the A train from Washington Heights with my brother, my mother would say, just find the conductor car and sit in it. And then there was a moment in city history when that wasn't a concern, didn't matter anymore. And now, at this moment in time, my own kids, when they go on the train, I say, find the conductor car. So we cannot ignore the fact that we have to do a lot more to keep the city safe above ground and below ground. And that is why I've said early in this campaign that we also have to start thinking about why we have the lowest police count in a generation. 33,461 cops are in the system now. 5,000 are on the streets at any given moment. It's not enough. That's why I've said let's hire 3,000 more police officers so that we can begin to really put not just police surging in the subways, but actually sustain a police presence on the streets, below ground, deter people from committing crime. Yes, we have to align policing with mental health, and I really wish Mayor Adams has kept his promise, because I think there was a real opportunity to help the people who are languishing and dying in our subways. They're not committing crimes. They are sleeping there because they have nowhere to go, and we have to change that. But let's be clear. We have to retain police officers. We'll talk about that today. And we also have to attract the next generation of police officers who are willing to come into the system. We've got to change shifts. We've got to start aligning daycare for 20% of the police force that's now women who are most likely not to continue in the police force. We need to attract people, but we also have to align the next generation of mental health professionals to work within the system to get things done.
Good morning, everyone. The first most important thing I would do is ask Jessica Tisch to stay on. Since she came on in November, I think she's demonstrating the difference that good leadership matters. Finally, under duress, Mayor Adams appointed on his 4th attempt. He got a great police commissioner. So I think we're seeing with murders down 35% this year, shootings down 23%, serious subway crime down 18%. This is, I don't think it's random. I think it's due to the change in leadership at the top. So a combination of a well-managed and well-run police department, combined over time, I agree with Scott that we need to get back about 10% more officers to where we were 5 years ago when crime was at a historic low. And then lastly, the criminal justice system needs to do its job, and we need to reform a number of pieces of legislation that have created a revolving door that have demoralized police officers who are doing their job and arresting criminals just to see them back out on the street the same day.
Thanks for having me, everyone. So there's a couple different facets. I'll cover it at a high level. Number one, I agree with Scott completely that we need more cops on the street, period, full stop. And the problem's worse than I think everybody understands, because with retirements this year, we could be down as many as 10,000 police officers. So, and we got to get those police officers in the precincts where they have community engagement and responsibility to their communities, as opposed to so much in these citywide units that are very important, but the resources have to be in the precincts. With respect to the leadership at the top of the NYPD, I want us to not forget that we had Keechant Sewell, who could have been a great commissioner if she had not been interfered with. And now we have Jessica Tisch, who's a fantastic commissioner as well, forced to have 2 appointees from Eric Adams that don't belong in those positions and still doing a great job. So one of the things that I think is critical for the mayor, whoever the next mayor is to stop interfering with the NYPD and letting the commissioner do his or her job. And to the point that a number of people have made, number one priority for me, aside from getting more officers on the street by stopping NYPD through the commissioner from having police officers do administrative jobs. There's 1,000 people that are in NYPD right now who are cops doing administrative jobs that could be out on the street. That's going to be my day one priority, is not what's going to happen in 6 months or a year, but what I can do on day one to get more cops on the street. And the second thing is to take mentally ill people off the street, period. Severely mentally ill people do not belong anywhere other than in treatment that will help them get better. It is the right thing for them. It was terrible social policy to let them languish on the streets where they create violence and harm to themselves as well as harm to our communities. And as mayor on day one, I will have a plan ready to start that process.
So I have a quick follow-up to that answer, and then we'll shift to subway crime. For those of you who talked about wanting to add more police to the department, just quickly, I'd love to know what you think the head count should be. Let's start with you, Jim.
So I think that,
Just quickly.
so what the head count should be about 40,000, but we may need more.
Whitney?
Call it high 30s.
I calculated 3,000 because right now, given the amount of officers that are leaving, we can't get to 40. We can't get to 38. 3,000 is what we can do in the short term.
I know.
Are we ready for rebuttals?
Let me do Comptroller Lander.
Getting to the budgeted headcount of 35,000 is a significant task. That it's going to take confronting the staffing crisis with recruitment and retention to do it.
Okay. And then just quickly for Comptroller Lander and former Comptroller Stringer, both of you a few years ago were part of calling to reduce funding for the NYPD. What has changed? Why are you now adopting a posture increasing the size of the department?
I mean, some of this is being responsive to the moment. In 2015, I supported a budget that added 1,300 cops to headcount. In response to the killing of George Floyd, there was a movement for police accountability that unfortunately did not achieve police accountability or put more resources in neighborhoods. And right now, if we want to be responsive and make the city safer, getting to the budgeted headcount we have, if 35,000 officers, is going to take some bold strategies. So I've called for expanding the NYPD cadet program, offering this Homes for City Workers program, and doing a range of things that will restore the relationship between police officers and New Yorkers.
Are those eyes for me or him?
Those eyes are for Comptroller Stringer.
The controller moment. Different moments in time call for different priorities. And I agree with Brad. There was a moment when we were trying to think about how we could actually prevent young people from falling into the criminal justice system. I actually believe that today. So part of this was how can we redirect some of this money to help kids stay out of trouble. And I think we should walk and chew gum at the same time. I don't think we should only direct resources to police. I think we obviously have a plan that is very much putting cops back on the street, back in the neighborhoods. But I also think we have to think about how we could prevent young people from getting caught up in the criminal justice system. The speaker mentioned a lot of different initiatives, and we should follow through with that.
And I have 10 seconds here. Defund the police was never a good policy. Period, full stop. Stripping cops of qualified immunity was never good policy. I don't care what the political winds were. It was bad policy that hurt people and took morale away from the cops. So I want that to be out there as well.
I think it's really tough for many New Yorkers to think about increasing the number of police officers when, yes, right now we have a shortage for the current targets. I myself in my district, I have the 110 and the 115, where we've seen a steady decline in the number of police officers serving our community. That being said, I think New Yorkers, many of them question what deployment tactics look like. When we see so many of them bunched up on a corner, bunched up on a platform, then it's hard for us to stomach why we need more people bunched up, not actually walking the beat, engaging with New Yorkers and understanding the neighborhoods and the communities that they serve. So I would want a deep deployment analysis so that we can better understand how we're utilizing the resources we have. And then we do need to attract police officers, especially as we lose some by attrition. We want to make sure that there's workforce housing, perhaps as an incentive, in order to lure New Yorkers to serve in many of the capacities where we do have serious shortages.
And we'll continue to talk about deployment in this next question. I want to shift to subway safety. So over the past year, there have been several high-profile incidents of violent crime on our subway system. Notably, a woman was set on fire and died. More than 24 people were pushed onto tracks in assaults or fights in the last year. Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams responded this year with increased overtime funding for another 1,000 police officers on the subways. If elected, would you maintain or increase this police presence on the subways? And if yes, is there anything you would change about their deployment or use of technology? And let's start with Jim Walden.
So thanks for the question. I do a couple of things. Certainly, I would increase the number of police, and to Jessica's points, I would make sure that they were on the trains, particularly in the early mornings and in the late nights. That strategy has proved effective, and I think that we should credit the Adams administration for the last numbers that we've seen, where the numbers are starting to trend in the right direction, which I think is a great relief to us all. But I would also increase just the number of people at some of the most problematic subway stops by having more retail on the platform at all times, and to make sure that we finally replace all of the security cameras that are not giving us the footage that we need to really apprehend people afterwards. Many of the cameras are better, but there's still many that need to be replaced.
Yeah. I agree with the increase that has happened in police officers on the subway, particularly at night. I think it's directly led to the decline in crime that we've seen. I think we need to go a step further. Right now, our state budget is held up in part because of objections by progressives to the changes, the tightening of the involuntary confinement laws. And I think that you've got to you not only have to have the cops, but you have to give them the tools, and that's a critical one. I applaud Governor Hochul for standing strong, and let's hope that will pass in the upcoming budget.
Look, the first couple of years, the Adams administration was really about performative policing in the subways. Put 1,000 cops in the trains or in the subway stations for a couple of weeks, run up overtime. Overtime went from $650 million to $1.3 billion. Then the overtime's getting too high. You pull the cops back out. You see the same problem over and over again. Then the governor comes in and says, I'm going to one-up you. 750 military personnel will go into the subways. I used to greet them in the morning, taking my kid to school. I said, how's everybody doing? They'd look up and say, oh, hi. And that's how we policed. I believe we should put those 3,000 cops, many on the subways, but into our trains with mental health professionals to start doing the hard work of policing. And that is something that we have to think about. But here's the reason why we can't get the staffing levels up. A lot of our police officers are leaving, the young ones, 2 and 3 years on the job. They're not giving up policing. They're being taken by Miami and Texas, all the mosquito states. They're leaving because they have better opportunity, right? And so we have to challenge that. That's why I talk about figuring out work schedules, 4-day work weeks, 10 hours a day, not 18 hours a day, have predictive schedules, childcare. We have to upend this police department in terms of looking at policing in the 21st century. We're still doing this job the same way we did it 50 years ago. One last quick point, and I'll take my time less. The reality is right now, we have a police force that the shift changes come at the worst time. 7 a.m., they change shifts. 3 p.m., when the kids get out of school, they change shifts. Why is that happening? Why don't we have staggered shifts?
There are so many vacant retail spaces in the MTA and large empty spaces in different stations. It is beyond me why no one in city government has thought about putting help desks with actual clinicians and social workers to become experts in the regular people who are habitating on our subway and in our system. We have to inject mental health professionals where possible in order to supplement the work of the NYPD. I want to make sure that in thinking about deployment and hiring, that we are really offering a professionalization of the NYPD for New Yorkers. We have spent a gross amount of money on overtime, on RoboCops, on the latest toy that Eric Adams has thought of, or whatever latest friend he made at Zero Bond, and that has been a terrible waste of our taxpayer dollars. So I want to make sure that we are spending it in the ways that matter. We can't just put the burden of handling people who are struggling with severe mental illness on police officers who are not necessarily trained in that matter, and actually be able to rely on building the mental health workforce that we currently don't have. And Hunter should play a great big role in that.
So I've been out with the SCOUT team, the Subway Co-Response Outreach Team of officers and mental health workers. I've been out with the IMT, the Intensive Mobile Treatment Team. I've been out with some of the private security guards trying to deal with fare evasion. And it all went into this Safer for All plan. I put out 75-page ready on day one plan to actually deal with the mental health crisis and homelessness in our subway system. We do need the officers on the train, and some of what's been said about deployment is a good improvement, and more of those co-response teams. We do need increased flexibility for involuntary hospitalization when people are a danger to themselves and others, and we need expanded mental health courts, which have been proven really effective. But if we don't do two other things, we are not going to make progress here. One of them is just a better coordinated continuum of care. When I was out with the IMT team, they had someone out there who had a unit for a housing unit for 3 months, but they couldn't get HRA to change their prior zip code on their application. They didn't have anyone at City Hall to call. The mayor's policies of homeless sweeps over the last 6 months swept 3,000 people out of the place they were sleeping. 0 got connected to stable housing. Almost none even went into shelter for a night. And at the end of the day, if you don't have a housing policy, this policy of housing first is working in Denver and Houston and Salt Lake City that takes people from the subway platforms and the stoops of our buildings into stable housing with services, which has been shown to work 70 to 90% of the time. Then when they come out of the hospital or they come out of Rikers, they're just going to be back on the street, or they can't even take them in the mental health courts because you can't make it work for an accountability system if they're just sleeping on the subway platform. So coordinated continuum of care with more enforcement, but at its heart, a housing first policy that connects people to stable housing and services will effectively end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness, and that really will be a safer city that feels better for everyone.
I happen to 1,000% agree with Scott Stringer. What he said, we are taking a look at policing the way that we took a look at policing 50, 60, 70 years ago. We have not contemporized the way that we look at policing and the way that policing is handled. The age that he mentioned, those are the ages that are leaving. People think that they're leaving. Attrition is going on because of retirement age. We're looking at police officers that have just been on the job for maybe 3 years, 4 years. As Scott said, they're moving on to greener pastures. We need to crack that code on the management of the NYPD, period. They are grossly mismanaged, and that needs to be taken a look at. Why are they leaving? I'll give you the number one reason. Scheduling has something to do with it, but they're not paid what they're worth. So we need to start there. We don't have a competitive salary for police officers in New York City. That management has to be changed. It has to be tweaked. And then I believe that we will have effective management. As far as the numbers of police officers on the trains, I agree. I think there is a correlation between the number of officers that we have on the trains and the reduction in crimes. More so the perception of crimes on the subways as well. I rode the train last week. I looked around, there was not an officer on any in sight. And I looked at the faces and I said to the people that were riding with me, what do they look like? Do they look scared? And no, they look like New Yorkers going home from work. They don't look afraid. They don't look like they're on edge. They don't look, like they're jumpy or anything. People look like New Yorkers. We are resilient. But the problem with the NYPD is mismanagement. I have ideas and I have implementation of ways that we have worked through the city council, to Jessica's point, ways that we actually have mental health professionals. CUNY is the pipeline, and I've implemented that through the city council. As mayor, I will expand on that pipeline to social services and mental health work.
I want to thank everyone. I have 2 quick lightning round questions. They're just raise your hand, so we're going to do them really fast. You both touched on them a little bit. How many of you have actually ridden the subway in the last week? Okay, so everyone except for Mr. Walden. And how many of you, if elected, would keep Commissioner Tisch as the police commissioner?
Consider, we're not going to make appointments this morning.
Okay. Thank you all, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Candidates? I want to talk with you for the next 20 minutes or so about quality of life and disorder. The number of 311 calls for nuisances like noise complaints, illegally parked cars, public inebriation, and of course, the ever-present odor of cannabis, those complaints have risen sharply in recent years. Complaints about disorderly conduct have nearly tripled compared to 2018. And the NYPD has responded. Arrests for disorderly conduct have risen significantly from 80 in 2018 to more than 220 last year. However, New Yorkers in every borough report feeling less satisfied about their quality of life than in the past. So I want to talk and get from each of you your general feeling about the connection between quality of life nuisance complaints and serious threats to public safety. We know that the strategy of the NYPD in the 1990s, or starting in the 1990s, was based on an observation backed by data that allowing small offenses to go unchecked and unpunished can give rise to more serious problems. So I guess I'd like to hear from each of you. Do you accept that premise that addressing quality of life helps prevent serious crime? And how would you address New Yorkers' concerns about quality of life without violating constitutional rights or opening the door to illegal profiling? And we'll start with you, Ms. Adams.
Thank you for the question. You know, I live in Southeast Queens in Jamaica, and I still take constituent calls as a council member. So I realize that quality of life concerns are the number one concerns. And I keep saying that if I don't understand the concerns of my neighbors, how can I possibly represent them? So I understand those concerns. As an elected official, we realize, though, that people do have rights, and we have to follow the law when it comes to the rights of individuals. So how do we balance those things, the quality of life issues and the annoyances that we may be subjected to as our own constituents? What I would say to that is, in this careful balance, that there can never be a sense of over-policing when it comes to small items, when it comes to small issues. We have to, however, take a stance when it comes to breaking the law. And we know that there are consequences to breaking the law, and those consequences have to be met. I don't believe in, as Eric Adams has, in these low-level crimes in keeping people in jail. We just lost someone else a few weeks ago to suicide that was on Rikers for petty theft, I believe in a CVS or something. That is outrageous to me. Why we are building the numbers of people in Rikers when we should be bringing those numbers down. And I can tell you that as someone that has been working to close Rikers for a number of years and watching this mayor build the jail with low-level criminals and then fight us or not collaborate on the closure, it has been something that has been very, very difficult. So I am in a place where if you break the law, there are consequences to that, but low-level crimes should never be penalized under the threat of death in Rikers Island.
Okay. I want to remind candidates, we have that clock. Most of the audience can't see it, but we'll ask you to abide with that. And by the way, just signal if you object to something one of your colleagues is saying and you want to jump in, just signal and we'll move it that way. Go ahead, Brad.
I mean, nobody should spend 3 years at Rikers for being accused of stealing a backpack. I think everybody in the room agrees with that. Of course, there is a connection between quality of life and crime, and it runs in both directions. I mean, retail theft is such a good example here because stores have experienced rising retail theft. Now all the toothpaste is behind lock and key, and your quality of life is diminished because it's a headache to go to the drugstore to get shampoo or toothpaste. There are ways of dealing with this that makes it better kind of across the board. So I got this comprehensive retail theft plan that says use technology to make it easier for those stores to report when it's happening. Right now, they're just like calling 911, competing with a shooting. Takes a long time for folks to come. You can use an online system. Other places have it that make it easy to report. And then you can actually do something to reduce retail theft and make people's quality of life better because you won't be so stressed out if we're providing them that system. Then as retail theft is going down in those stores, they got to unlock the toothpaste and make people's lives better. A lot of other ways to do that. Like big quality of life complaints are illegal dumping or even noise complaints. Now, your phone knows how loud things are. So 311 should make it easy for you to record the noise, and then you don't have to wait for officers to show up for them to see that there is a violation. We can make quality of life better using technology and data in a way that will help us be safer and live happier lives.
Do you think there's a public safety payoff from those strategies?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, illegal dumping, when you let a neighborhood get lots of trash, it tends to be low-income communities, communities of color, like you provoke a sense of ongoing disorder. It feels like it's okay if you're using more cameras to make sure illegal dumpers get caught and you reduce it. That neighborhood will be nicer to live in and safer, absolutely.
It's not just about the illegal dumping. I think there are many corners, especially on commercial corridors throughout our city, that are lacking trash cans. And making sure that we are able to support clean streets in that way certainly changes the way New Yorkers view their streets. I also think we need to think about why it is that so many New Yorkers are self-soothing with alcohol and marijuana and other substances that are being abused. And in the same way that we talk about severe mental illness, well, there's less severe mental illness, and how statistically, even prior to the pandemic, 1 in 5 New Yorkers has been struggling with a mental health malady of some sort. I suspect that post-pandemic, that statistic has probably only increased, and that more so making sure that we are weaving mental health services into every aspect of our lives, schools, workplaces, and certainly our city hospitals that shouldn't just be about physical health, and Bellevue Hospital shouldn't just be the only one with a serious number of psychiatric beds, and lending those types of services is really vital to us offering the quality of life that we want New Yorkers to have. We are seeing a rise in petty crime and petty theft, largely because there are people who are struggling to pay their bills. There are a certain thing called crimes of poverty. It's also about kleptomania and people who don't know how to snap out of it. So being able to actually get to the root cause of why these things are taking place, especially when it's such a small group of people, is really really deserves us to zero in and give attention to those who are seeking it, so that we can respond with the appropriate treatment for them and keep them away from doing harm.
Thank you.
Well, when you talk about quality of life, I think many of you see what I've seen all my life living in the city. First, you see a building that gets abandoned. It's on a plot of land. Nobody pays attention to it. Grass keeps growing and growing and growing, and suddenly the grass is surrounding the building. People say, hey, wait a minute, we can make bank here, let's break in, let's set up a drug den, let's do some bad things there. No one's gonna catch us because the grass is growing and growing. The police come in 2 years later after the community has an outcry. They raid the place, arrest people, spend all this time, overtime, processing people, and this goes on and on until the next vacant, abandoned building creates another potential for crime or some misuse. If we just mowed the lawn, and kept the building in repair, we would not see a community's quality of life go down. So when I'm mayor, we're gonna have the deputy mayor for quality of life. Don't think we've ever had this before. We're gonna align the agencies with the police, but mostly without the police, to get city agencies to do the quality of life work that police should not be doing. We need to align the buildings department and the role of the expediter, which I still cannot believe is still there after all these years. We should be able to talk to our agencies. We have to think about how we align mental health initiatives. And like CompStat for the NYPD, it is time to concept 911 and 311 complaints, align the data so we can actually solve problems on the streets. I don't know about all of you, I do, but look, near my building, the garbage is 2 stories high. 2 stories high. The rats walk upright. They've said to me on more than one occasion, can you really beat Cuomo?
Okay.
So it's time to get rid of the rats by getting rid of the garbage.
Okay. Mr. Tilson.
Yeah, when I'm mayor, I'm going to make crime illegal. I think my colleagues here are largely dodging the issue. This is not about abandoned buildings or tall grass. This is about people committing crimes. And 5 years ago or so, after Democrats flipped the state Senate, we became a one-party state. A whole raft of extremist, I would say, criminal justice reform legislation passed that basically decriminalized all but the most serious crimes. Not surprisingly, when there are no consequences for all categories of misdemeanors, the number soared. And not surprisingly, the number of 311 calls doubled, citizens complaining about this. So one of the other things I mentioned earlier, involuntary confinement. The other thing holding up the state budget is Governor Hochul is holding a strong line on reforming the discovery reform law that completely changed the balance of power in our criminal justice system and has again resulted in a revolving door for low-level crimes. And not surprisingly, now that the NYPD is enforcing these crimes, just in the past 4 or 5 months, not only are the low-level crimes going down, but the more serious crimes are dropping precipitously.
Senator Ramos?
Discovery reform is not what's holding up the New York State budget. And I just want to get on the record to say that what we need to do is make sure we're fully funding district attorneys' offices so that the proper sharing of evidence to the defense upholds the person's right to due process. So there is a role that the mayor does play here, especially in appointing criminal judges and making sure that our courtrooms are fully functioning. And that's what discovery reform is about.
I had a follow-up for you, Mr. Tilson. I mean, we heard from Scott Stringer, him talking about, sort of the parable that I think we all know about of the uncut grass that hides the building that leads to serious crime. You don't accept that? You don't know? You don't think that there's a relationship between the one and the other?
Oh, I absolutely accept that, but I'm saying that it's so much safer to talk about uncut grass and a lot harder to talk about recidivism and people who are out there engaging in criminal behavior, and there need to be consequences. For example, on the New York City subway, the police have stepped up enforcement of people smoking, drinking, lying across seats, etc. There are arrests in 32% of the cases. 31% of the people arrested have multiple long track records, an average of 21 prior arrests. So this is there's a direct correlation, I think, between enforcing the quality of life, which puts the police in contact with people who are longtime recidivists, and getting those people out of the subway system and off our streets is critical to keeping us safe.
I don't want to belabor the point, but if those 21 prior arrests were also for sleeping on the subway or being inebriated, does that make any difference?
As opposed to 21 murders?
Yeah, that's
sure.
The premise of the question.
Yes, it makes a significant difference. I would just say California just passed a ballot proposition, Proposition 36, which basically said on your first two, it tightened up prior ballot initiative. But for example, on your first two retail thefts, petty larceny, it's treated as a misdemeanor. The third time, it's upcharged as a felony. So, the idea, obviously no one should be sent to Rikers for stealing a bottle of shampoo, but about the 20th time where you've got chronic recidivism, there need to be more serious consequences.
Okay. Mr. Walden.
Thank you. So I think I forgot the question, but I'm pretty sure it was not really about quality of life so much as it was about broken windows policing. And I'm going to answer that question, but I just want to say one thing because the audience is super important. If you think that NYPD officers are leaving New York City because of bad NYPD management, go talk to cops. That's not why they're leaving the city. They're leaving the city because they keep being told by elected officials how to do their jobs, whether it's how to arrest people or what databases they're allowed to use, et cetera, et cetera. And unless we wake up and smell the coffee and realize that we have really tried to shift policing to elected officials that have no idea what they're doing, we're going to continue to be in danger. Now, on broken windows, I love to know whether people actually read the original Kelling study on this. It's really important. I believe in it. Bill Bratton believes in it, and I believe that we can do it smarter. So I've already announced a policy that I'm going to revert to a smarter and more just form of broken windows policing, because you know who wants it? The people who are most dramatically affected by the graphic up there. They don't want people defecating on their sidewalks. They don't want people breaking the law on the subway. And to Whitney's point, the 31% from the recent statistics, those were people that had multiple felony convictions, not misdemeanors. And so broken windows policing works to get guns off the street, to arrest people that have open warrants, to arrest people who are persistently violent. And the data shows that it works as long as it's done intelligently. The fact that we are going to increase enforcement of small crimes doesn't mean that we have to incarcerate everyone. That was the problem with broken windows policing in the last iteration. It wasn't necessarily the enforcement that leads to deterrence. It was the over-criminalization of the consequences. We don't have to have one or the other. It's a false choice. We can have a smart broken windows policing that doesn't always require police given the technology that we have. And we don't always have to have incarceration in order to get the deterrent results.
Okay, we're going to get a couple of responses, first from Adrienne Adams and then from Scott Stringer.
NYPD needs to be better managed, and lawmakers produce the laws and create the policy. The management of those policies come from the agencies that are responsible for following the law. When we take a look at the policies that are put in place for NYPD or anyone else, the policies come from what lawmakers hear from the people. They don't come from thin air. They come from the people's issues. That is where the policies are made, a lot of times and most of the time with the help of the agencies that we are working with to produce law and produce policies. Policies that come forth to the NYPD are collaborated with the NYPD to produce those laws. So the management does not come from the elected officials or from the city council or from any other elected body or legislature. The policy and the implementation of those policies come from the agencies.
I'm sorry, Texas and Florida have videos out there right now with former NYPD officers recruiting NYPD officers because of the policies that you guys have put in place that makes it impossible for police to do their jobs. They're literally recruiting videos that are about how difficult it is to be a police officer in New York City, and it's working. That's why we're losing police officers.
Mr. Stringer.
Just want to bring home, what I think a lot of the question was, which was quality of life. Look, and Harold knows this, back in 1975, we had a charter commission in the city that said we were going to actually empower local planning boards and local elected officials, as Adrienne mentioned, to deal with quality of life issues in communities. What's broken down is the council and the local elected officials are still doing the job. The problem is the government agencies have failed. We have an exodus of city employees. None of the calls get answered, none of the emails get answered, and what piles up time and time again is the anger our people are feeling for a city that seems out of control, in part because of the garbage, in part because of the vacant storefronts, in part because people don't think anyone is listening to them in city government. And that's why I want to bring home this idea of managing quality of life inside City Hall. The same way we manage policing in Comstat, we've got to hold agencies accountable. How many complaints in the buildings department? How many mental health complaints? Where are the homeless people living on the street? Do they need help? Let's go get them. Let's measure that. Let's use data. That is what we have to focus on. You know, this is a discussion on policing, and we've certainly talked about that, but you have to align policing with the real issues that are facing New Yorkers out in the street.
Okay, real quick, Mr. Leonard.
So for recruitment and retention of officers, you need a recruitment and retention program. That's why, like, expanding the NYPD cadet program that would let kids out of high school become cadets and start helping them with the credits they need to take the test, helping folks buy homes in the 5 boroughs, and making there be incentives to stay past 20 years. Those would practically help us both recruit and retain officers. One last real vital city point I just want to make, because if you're doing quality of life issues, I mentioned mental health courts before. The mental health and drug treatment courts that we have expanded in New York City are really key here. Even Manhattan Institute, in their paper on retail theft, said there's a deep connection between the people who are hitting retail stores over and over again and people with substance abuse problems. The drug treatment courts and the mental health courts can suspend sentences so long as people are complying with mental health treatment and drug treatment programs. So if you're going to do this approach, you've got to have it actually take that problem-solving approach that tries to get at the problems that people have. We have taken real steps on that, but it's going to take investments if we want to take them to the next level.
Okay, folks, I have I have a show of hands question and one with brief responses, and then we're going to move on to jails. When it comes to cannabis, does New York City need a public awareness campaign similar to past efforts to reduce secondhand smoke? Show of hands. Anybody interested in that? No? Okay. And then I guess for each of you, real briefly, if you had enhanced powers to hold and treat seriously mentally ill people, if as mayor you get some of what's being talked about up in Albany, how many people would you expect to hospitalize? And does our city have enough treatment beds for them? And we'll start with you, Mr. Walden.
So, I mean, I think everyone probably understands this issue is very, very personal to me. And so we need to reopen the Manhattan Psychiatric Center, and we need to expand the mental health facilities on Rikers to be able to deal with some of the overflow. But there's roughly 2,000 people on the street right now that are severely mentally ill. When I say on the street, really about 20%, 20 to 25% at any given time may be in Rikers. So there is space in order to get them into localized treatment facilities, and we can have contracts with out-of-city providers for overflow. So I think I answered the question.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Tilson.
I think one of the great public policy disasters of the past half century has been the almost total 95% deinstitutionalization of long-term mental care facilities. In 1960, there were 95,000. We're down to 3,500 statewide. And one of the most shocking conversations I had is I asked, well, what happened to all those people? And someone who was close to the situation said, we gave them bus tickets to the Port Authority. So we're seeing on our streets and in Rikers the consequence of people who, it's not short-term treatment. These are people who will forever be unable to care for themselves. That's why I think we need to change the involuntary confinement law to people who cannot care for themselves. We as a society need to care for them. We need to expand those beds, permanent long-term beds, not just short-term treatment.
How many?
I would guess 4,000 total is what we need statewide, mostly New York City.
Okay, Mr. Stringer.
Look, and yeah, we've had a lot of these debates, and Jim always speaks so passionately about his lived experience, and I really appreciate that. Look, the tragedy is to go into a subway car and see somebody, no danger to anyone else, but a danger to themselves, dying in front of us. It is something I've seen my kids deal with when we ride the subways, and it's real. And we as a city have to, through the lens of civil liberties and making sure that we protect the rights of all people, also have to help people get into the services they need, whether it's a public hospital, a psychiatric bed, but we cannot close our eyes to the fact that they will be dying by Christmas or by the next cold winter. And I think the mayor, with expanded authority that is used with great respect and with great caution, can end up saving the lives of people. The other thing I want to mention is this notion that police officers grab somebody who's suffering or having an episodic event in the subway, they put them on the street and walk away is not acceptable. It's also not acceptable simply to bring someone to a hospital for 48 hours knowing they're going to get discharged, and there's no medical personnel that's tracking the people who leave the hospital, go back to Penn Station or somewhere else. And I've heard statistics, in my readings, that it's not just 2,000. It could be as many as 7,000 people that we are aware of. We actually know who they are because they're constantly rolling in and out of facilities. Do we track them? Do we make sure they're taking their medicine? We have to rethink this through the lens of saving lives, and I hope we can do it.
Thank you. Ms. Ramos.
I've been championing the expansion of mental health court in the state Senate for my entire tenure. And we always get stuck in this debate about whether or not to confine people against their will. But we never really land on the funding and follow through needed to get the psychiatric beds that we've been promised. Just last year in the New York State budget, we provided for funding for over 1,000 beds, and those haven't been opened anywhere, whether it's in hospitals or in actual psychiatric institutions. We are just so far behind and take mental health quite unseriously in this town that we're reaping we're reaping what we've sowed. And it's really unfortunate because whether it's psychiatric beds or supportive housing with wraparound services, when it comes to mental health services, when it comes to workforce development, I'll say that there is a lot lacking to make us New Yorkers feel like this is indeed our city and that we are dignified as the human beings that we are. And I'm gonna venture to say that on this stage, I'm the only person that's been stopped and frisked in my life. It is humiliating, it is traumatizing, it really changes your life. And for us to actually make sure that we are putting forth a safe city means giving New Yorkers the opportunities that we've been waiting for our whole life. And I'm hoping that we finally elect a mayor that understands that.
Mr. Lander.
Eric Adams was supposed to build 360 secure treatment beds in a partnership between Health and Hospitals and Department of Correction, starting with 100 at Bellevue. As of today, 3 years after he's been in office and that plan was adopted before that, 0 of them have been open. Lippman Commission 2.0 proposes to scale that up to somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 because there's about 1,500 people at Rikers now with serious mental illness. So moving forward on that plan, I believe. And at the same time, Jim Walden is right that there's about, separate from the folks at Rikers, about 2,000 people on the streets, unsheltered, with serious mental illness. Meanwhile, right now, there are about 2,500 vacant supportive housing and SRO units that they're not eligible for because of the Adams administration's housing last policies. If you change that and make those folks eligible for that housing first option of housing with services, you can dramatically reduce the number of people sleeping on the streets with serious mental illness. And in addition to talking about how many secure treatment beds we build, I'd like to be measured by how many people we actually get stably housed.
Ms. Adams.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that's been said on this particular issue. The numbers are absolutely upwards of 5,000, 7,000. I would even say 10,000, even more. There is so little being done to capture the solution to this issue that, as Jessica said, it is absolutely unacceptable and it's unexcusable. There is supportive housing available today to help those in mental health crisis, but nobody is moving on it. We have a mayor that has not done anything, that absolutely has the power but not the will to do something, that has made promises regarding supportive housing. When it comes to the involuntary expulsion issue, the law is already there. What happens, though, is that there is no follow-through and there is no help for individuals after a certain point. They are then released back out into the population with nothing, given nothing, no help, no follow-up, no housing. So we need to have a mayor, which I will be, that absolutely follows up and follows through with the help for individuals in mental health crisis, not just by taking them off the street, but by offering them the medication that they need, the housing that they need, and the services that they need. We need something and someone on the other side of City Hall that is going to follow through, not just grab people up, keep them for 48 hours and say, okay, you're fine to go now. They are not fine to go. And as Jessica said, we are reaping what we have sown. There has to be a mayor, which I plan to be, that will absolutely follow through on helping, finally helping those in mental health crisis.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Reuven Blau has some questions for you about jails and courts.
The number of people locked up on Rikers Island has now up to 7,000.
Yeah.
Just a little closer.
7,100. Specifically for the people who have called for the increase in police, how has historically that number has increased number of officers has led to an increase in number of people locked up? How would you connect those two? I start with
So I've laid out a bunch of this already. I mean, mental health and drug treatment courts can go a long way in helping people get treatment rather than being in jail or prison. Second, there's a real timely trials issue. We did a report on this. Since the pandemic, the amount of time that trials are taking has grown by about 50% in some cases. There's about 1,500 people more at Rikers as a result of the length trials are taking. So investing in the criminal justice system and keeping those trials moving can bring that number down as well. And then building those secure treatment beds that we were supposed to get started on and that the Lippman Commission 2.0 recommends expanding are all ways of making sure that we both keep the city safer, keep the numbers who are in prison or in jail down, and actually move forward to close Rikers by building the borough-based jails, adding those secure treatment facilities, reducing the amount of time people are taking, and that's how we'll get there.
Mr. Stringer, you've been an early advocate for the the closure of Rikers, but how would adding more cops, wouldn't that create a larger population, making it more difficult to actually close Rikers?
I think I was the first elected official to say shut it down, and let me just tell you why. Having toured Rikers, before it became fashionable, when I was city controller, what I saw there was heartbreaking. Not only was the physical plant collapsing, but the people there awaiting trial were broken. And it really shocked to see that, and I went there voluntarily because I know people who are elected sometimes end up there anyway. But I do think it's not an either or. I think you can have police that prevent people from getting incarcerated, because part of what we have to think about is what is deterrence mean? And how do we align, as many of us have talked about, mental health initiatives, youth services programs. Adrienne mentioned Be Heard and all of the programs that keep people out of the system. There's no reason to think that protecting people on the streets has to lead to more incarceration. And I think Brad is right. When you look at the issues facing trials, I also think we have to then look at discovery, look at ways to streamline the justice system, ensuring people's rights, but also being realistic that you can't have backlogs of cases of people languishing in jail. When I was controller, I settled a lot of cases, pre-litigation, people who were innocent. There was a young man who died boiled to death, literally, at Rikers. And I remember settling that case before the law department got there. It was very controversial at the time. And I remember giving the mother a check for $2 million. And I said, on behalf of the city, we apologize for this happening. This was a homeless veteran. And the mother just looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, if you can get my son back, you can keep the money.
I actually disagree with the plan to close Rikers. I think we need to shrink it and reform it, but I think it would be a tremendous threat to public safety to close it, given that the city council, their 4 borough-based jails only have capacity. It's, of course, way behind schedule, way over budget, and won't be completed maybe till 2032, but we'll only have 4,100 beds. We're currently at 7,100. And I don't know what they plan to do with the other 3,000 people there, but they cannot safely be released. That would cause a huge surge in crime. I confidently predict that the City Council will rescind its plan to completely close Rikers. It can't be done safely in a city of 8+ million people. And we will have a system of 5 jails, the 4 borough-based ones, and Rikers. But I don't think Rikers is an abomination. It cannot be fixed at its current size. We've proven that, but I think it can be fixed if it has a population of 1,000 or 2,000 people and is 2 or 3 facilities that are rebuilt in a safe way, as opposed to the current dilapidated 8 facilities.
And just a quick follow-up to that. You said you wanted to shrink it. What size would work?
I think in the short term, as the NYPD is enforcing and arresting more folks on the subway who are committing the lower level crimes, that's what's driven the short-term rise. I do think longer term, there will be a deterrent effect. Rikers at one time, at the peak of our murder epidemic, had 20,000 people on it. As our murder rate dropped by 87%, so did the Rikers population. There was a huge reduction in crime. So that's long term. Short term, though, Rikers population is going up a bit, and I expect we'll probably continue to go up. I've heard an estimate of 7,400 by later this year. All other things being equal, I think it is unfortunate that more people are incarcerated. But I do think there is a correlation between a 35% drop in our murders this year and the fact that there are a few hundred more people at Rikers because cops are enforcing the law, and DA's offices are prosecuting more often. The things I have called for about making crime illegal are happening. That's resulted in a short-term increase in the population at Rikers, but long-term, I think that can come down.
Thanks.
So thank you for the question. I'm a big believer in answering the question you asked, so I want to make sure that I understand it. Number one, to the extent that you're saying an increase in police officers will mean an increase in incarcerated people, it wouldn't temper, if that's true, assuming that your hypothetical is true.
I just want to interrupt on that. Historically speaking, that has always been the case. There has never been, it's a moment in recent history where the number of police officers added to the department has not led to an increase in people on Rikers Island.
I completely understand. For thousands of years, people thought the world was flat too, but I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be that way. So, but I'm saying, if you assume the basis of your question, it wouldn't deter me from hiring the police officers we need because we don't have a good plan for jail space. The fact that we don't have a good plan for jail space is a failure of public policy, right? When you have bad leaders, you have bad policy, and then you have bad outcomes. It's not, that's not that hard. And so if anyone is under the belief that Rikers is gonna close on time, please, I've got a bridge that I will sell you because it's never gonna happen. And we should be able to say it. It's not going to close on time. Now the question is, should it close? And the answer is, I don't think anyone understands how complex Rikers is and all of the things that it does and how it's not gonna be able to be replaced by 4 borough jails. Putting aside from the fact that none of the boroughs want it and Staten Island didn't even have to have one, that's a bad plan. And now the horse is already out of the barn in the sense that there's already been contracts awarded and there's already been demolition work done. So I don't know that it can be reversed, but I think that that was a bad policy to begin with. You don't close a hospital because there's quality of care issues. You fix the quality of care issues. And honestly, if I were the mayor, I would consent to the federal monitor, get another set of eyes, try to figure out why mayor after mayor after mayor, regardless of whether they're Republicans or Democrats, can't get Rikers right. It's one island with a complex system of buildings and facilities, but it's also not putting a man on the moon. So I would fix the root of the problem, and the root of the problem is not the buildings at Rikers, although they clearly need to be replaced. It's the management of Rikers that no administration has been able to get right. I say consent to the federal monitor, and in the meantime, take the money that's still available from the borough jails and invest it in Rikers, because there should have been investments in Rikers all along. What we're seeing is the results of bad policy and failed leadership. And if you want to keep having bad policy and failed leadership, keep voting for the same people over and over again.
Speaker Adams, I know you've obviously advocating for the closure of Rikers and talked about it repeatedly. How would you get the population down to the 4,400 marker?
Well, first of all, let me just say that closing Rikers is the law. All right, so that is what we are following. And if we take a look at, I'm not sure that everyone on this panel has read the Lippman Commission 2.0, which I commissioned to, I guess, to keep us on track and to bring us into reality now. Let me just say a couple of things about that. The pandemic caused the slowdown of the closure of Rikers, obviously. I don't think that there's anyone in this room that will debate the fact that that it will be delayed as far as the closure. That is not for question. I think that is a reality. The report also took a look at how we get to closing Rikers. The fact that Rikers has become the de facto mental health facility for more than half of its population is an issue. So again, in taking a look at the report, And the suggestions that are in the report suggest a removal of individuals and putting them into the appropriate facilities, which is not Rikers Island. Rikers Island is a death camp. I think that we can at least agree to that. And removing those individuals who do have mental health issues from Rikers Island will significantly decrease that population. And in addition, the borough-based jails, we can talk a lot about, what they mean to some people, what they don't mean. But of course, over the years and because of the pandemic, materials costs to build those borough-based jails has increased, obviously. So the cost has gone up. So that is an issue as well. The borough-based jails were created, the concept, because it is believed that people do better when they live closer to where they come from. So that is the concept behind the borough-based jails. Once again, the commission, I'm going to stop, Errol. The clock is over 2 minutes. But read Lippman Commission 2.0. It tells a lot.
Just moving tracks a little bit. Currently, I think it's about 230 people are on Rikers right now who have failed what's called a 730 exam, which is just a really basic line level test to see if they're competent to stay on trial. What, if elected mayor on day one, what would you do with that population? And it'd start with Senator Ramos.
Thank you. I think beyond visiting Rikers, it's also very important for elected officials or people who want to be elected to office to do court watch in our spare time and actually really understand the people who are standing trial and why it is that they have committed crimes or whether they understand that they've done that. I was at Bronx Criminal Court last month where it was very clear that we have New Yorkers who are suffering from severe cognitive delays and don't necessarily understand what has transpired. One man stabbed his mother several times, not understanding that he had actually hurt her. And so I think we can talk about all of the preventive measures, but making sure that we are actually replacing what must be similar to a 16th century style dungeon where we just lock people away and throw away the key, and understanding that people on Rikers have actually not been convicted of the crimes that they've been accused of. We should actually provide for, depending on the crime that's been committed, whether it's supportive housing, whether it's high security facilities, psychiatric facilities, so that we are properly secluding them from the general population. In general, I'm not a fan of general population. I've known many people who have gone to Rikers and come back out much worse than they've ever been before, largely because now they are playing the game of survival inside and have to create alliances that they might not have had to do before. So making sure that we are taking care of people and actually providing for the programming, services, and facilities that are necessary to keep New Yorkers safe should be the replacement for Rikers Island, where so many people have died. I even witnessed a man hanging himself in front of me during one of my last visits. And I can tell you that anybody can paint a picture of how terrible Rikers Island is. Nobody can really describe for you all the stench of what it is to be there.
Mr. Stringer?
I think Jessica's right. I think we certainly have to be mindful when someone is incarcerated or somebody is taken because they don't have the mental capacity, whether it's to stand trial or even to survive the jail system. I have a lot of friends, people who have told me stories about their incarceration over the years. You do not want to be in this situation. The survival instincts of a human being come full force in just trying to survive day to day. And so we have to be very cautious and very careful that we give people who really can't survive or they do things that are not in their control, that we make amends to help them. And think about this, Reuven. It's kind of crazy, right? We're talking about 230 people with a multi-million-dollar budget. When I was controller, I shocked the world when we did the calculation that showed that incarcerating people in Rikers per individual costs $500,000 an inmate. $500,000. Imagine if we didn't have a corrupt Department of Corrections. Imagine if this organization, so-called organization, wasn't put on my watch list for years. Imagine, as Jim says, if we actually went in and broke the system and reorganized it, reconstituted it, and make sure that we not only saved financially, but we protected the dignity of innocent people, and we made sure that the bad folks end up in the prison system where they belong, which I have no problem with.
I mentioned going out with that intensive mobile treatment team and that there was one person who had a housing unit waiting, but they couldn't get HRA to change the zip code for 3 months. The other person we were talking about that day was at Woodhull. And they were going to get released right back to the street, even though pretty much everyone who had seen their case recognized this was someone who needed to be in a state psychiatric institution. And the hospital wasn't referring them because there are no beds. And those couple hundred people at Rikers, those are folks who need to be in a state psychiatric institution. And we don't have those beds right now, largely because Andrew Cuomo cut the Medicaid budget and the budget that provided them. And there are many fewer of them than there used to be. So we have to restore that pathway. It's a small group of people, but obviously that's different from folks who can succeed in supportive housing or who can succeed if they're in a mental health treatment program. And I apologize, I'm gonna have to leave in just a minute. So I am gonna connect the dots here. You will see that on the stage, you don't have the person who is polling the highest in the polls. And I just think it's worth saying, like, if you would like someone who engages with data, who engages with New Yorkers, who tries to be thoughtful in conversation about where we're going as a city, you should be appalled by the fact that he hasn't come to one single forum where other people are sitting on the stage together. He's running a campaign that is involved, just trying to stay out of the public eye. Even if you support him, I think you ought to ask the question, like, is that what we want from New York City right now? So I'm grateful to everybody else who's on this stage. I'm grateful to Vital City and Roosevelt House for prompting thoughtful conversation about tough issues. That's what you want in a mayor's race, and I really appreciate you all being here this morning. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Gonna do a quick show of hands question. Yeah.
I don't think you got to me on that issue, but
Go for it. Sorry, I'm sorry.
so the truth of the matter is that cohort is a little bit more complicated than uniform, but for the cohort that you're talking about of the 230, the only place for them, whether they were in Rikers Island or they were in the best prison in the United States, is not in prison, right? So I would take that cohort and put them in mental health facilities, and I do believe that there's plenty of room in the state to get that done.
I mean, just a quick follow-up on that. The issue is that there actually isn't right now, right? Like the 230 people are sentenced, they're failed at 730 exams, so they're supposed to go to the state, and the state's saying, we don't have the space. So that's why they're stuck on Rikers.
Yeah, so the state of New York says that they don't have the space, and I can't interrogate what you're saying, so I'm gonna accept it as true and say that this is what I do. I would find, whether it was in the state of New York or it was in other states, I would find places that have available bed space, and I would get those people, as a matter of our moral clarity, out of prison, period. If I had to build a space and I had to use city funds in order to create a space for those people, they do not belong in jail.
Got it. And just a quick show of hands question. A lot of talk about bringing ICE back to Rikers. On the panel, do you support bringing ICE back to Rikers Island? Show of hands in favor of bringing ICE back to Rikers.
It is terrible public policy. It is just terrible, terrible public policy. What anyone else thinks about this idea, the idea that you're going to announce to a combined group of people, by the way, ICE is going to take you back to the country.
Hands.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, so nobody, I just want to clarify, nobody here supports that. Okay. And just a longer question. Just want to ask the candidates, how do you believe that supervised release is going so far? And would you make any changes to the current policies that are around it, and starting with Speaker Adams?
Supervised release can always be improved. I don't think that there is anything that is 100% fail-safe. So there can always be improvements in supervised release. We have to get more creative also when it comes to supervised release. And I'm going to stop my clock here because I think I've taken like over twice already. But there can always be improvements. Again, there is no fail-safe method here, so there can always be improvements, although I absolutely do think that it is a necessity.
Yeah, I think there are lots of underutilized tools when it comes to supervised release. I think we should examine whether it makes sense to fold parole into the Department of Correction. I think that perhaps we underutilize ankle monitors for those who are able to lead some sort of normal life, so to speak. I think every single a tool should be on the table when it comes to figuring out how we can keep people outside if they're able to, and make sure that we are keeping an eye on them so that they don't commit the same crime or another crime again.
Scott?
I think it's not just the individual, but it's also what happens when that individual gets out, or does that person have a safe place to go? We talk about, a lot of supportive housing, a lot of beds, but there's also a lot of families that are being forced to pay expenses in the prison system, in Rikers and other prisons, that ends up drying up the resources of families. And whether it's the commissary or just trying to get through the day in the prison, there's a lot of resources. When I was controller, I did a lot of reports on the amount of money inmates have to pay. They don't have a job, they don't have any resources, and then it goes to the family. So I think, excuse me? No, I mean, they don't have a job when they get out of it. But I think we do have to recognize that they have, that we have to also align them with family and expenses so that we can keep them out, so they don't have to go and then suddenly they're taking other measures to support the families that they're staying with.
I did read the latest Lippman Commission report, and I agree with what Senator Ramos just said about using greater use of ankle monitors. Apparently, we use them less in New York City than the rest of the state. And I don't believe that the people charged with crime should be required to pay for it and otherwise placed into increased financial debt, which of course leads to recidivism and so forth.
So I think the system needs to be reimagined. We have parole officers at the city, state, and federal level. Those offices largely do the same and overlapping things at different levels of quality with different financing. They should be combined into one agency that covers all cohorts. Some of the people that they're supervising have federal and state parole officers. So if there was one system, everyone was communicating well, it would work a lot better.
Thanks. Going to shift it over to Errol.
Okay. Candidates, we're coming down the home stretch, so I'll ask you to be especially brief and we can get through a whole lot of other issues. One thing that I know we didn't have time to get into regarding jails, but I wanted to see by a show of hands, and I know this came up and Jim Walden mentioned it, who here would be in favor, if you're elected and you take office on January 1st, of agreeing with and helping to facilitate an outside federal court monitor for Rikers Island? All in favor? Did I see your hand, Mr. Tilson, or no?
No.
Why's that?
Because I think the real problem with Rikers is the condition of its facilities and its size, and I don't think switching monitors will fix that. I think we need to shrink it and rebuild a smaller number of facilities.
Okay. Let's move on. We're going to talk about, in our last section here, police misconduct and community relations. And I'm going to start with you, Ms. Adams. 6 months ago, Mayor Adams pushed out one leader of the Civilian Complaint Review Board after opposing that chair's request for additional funding and authority. He has yet to name a permanent chair. That has to be done in conjunction with the City Council. At the same time, laws passed in recent years give the CCRB responsibility for investigating past misconduct and bias complaints against officers, but a flat budget and a shrinking headcount have made it impossible for the agency to do so, even though the number of civilian complaints about bias, abuse of authority, discourtesy, and untruthful statements has reached a 10-year high. So here's the two-part question. If elected, would you increase fiscal support for the CCRB? And do you support calls to make the agency's budget a fixed percentage of the overall NYPD budget? Ms. Adams.
Yes and yes. I have been a proponent and have supported legislation and passed legislation to increase the teeth of the CCRB that were summarily weakened in previous years. We need the CCRB. We need them to be the voice of reason and the voice of balance when it comes to police accountability, which is very, very difficult at times to have with the NYPD. I have been in oversight hearings with the CCRB who have told us time and time again that there is information and material that has been withheld from them. There has been body-worn camera footage that has been intentionally withheld from them from looking at the materials and looking at the evidence that they need to protect civilians, if you will. So I've seen firsthand, and that is why I have enacted legislation to enhance the CCRB, to give them more vitability and to give them more teeth when it comes to their needs and being able to perform their duties, which have been in many ways just very, very reduced because of a lack of police accountability and willingness to collaborate, to work with them. So the answer to both of those questions is yes.
As a follow-up for all of the reporters who are watching this, what's the holdup in naming a permanent chair? Is there a candidate? Are you in discussions?
We are in discussions. The former chair is very, very hard to replace. She was amazing, and it is in the works. It is in the works.
Okay, Ms. Ramos.
So striking the balance between justice and accountability is really what goes into play here. I think, we want laws to be enforced, but we of course want to make sure that no one is above the law. Not a police officer, not a mayor, not a president even. So we want to make sure that there is a civilian complaint review board with teeth, that is fully staffed, that is fully resourced, because we do have a responsibility to the public to make sure that the NYPD is a serious organization. And that means taking out those police officers who are unfit to serve. And whether that is a proper vetting on the front end or making sure that we are using the CCRB to root out the quote unquote bad apples, can only result in a much more dignified and disciplined and professionalized NYPD that we deserve. Or else people are not going to believe in our system, which is what's happening right now. In addition, I would turn those police scanners back on. The fact that the media can no longer follow exactly how crime is being responded to is a problem. There's an over-reliance on data and information that is only coming from the NYPD without a third party really looking at where those numbers are coming from. And we know that sometimes those numbers in the past have gotten cooked. So creating a trust in these institutions in this way of providing for accountability is a big part in keeping our city safe.
Okay, Mrs. Stringer.
A strong CCRB means a strong police department, because we have to hold accountable the men and women who wear that uniform, because we do have a public trust. We have to keep kids safe on the street. You okay? You all right? All right. Yeah. Why does it always happen to me? No. We tend to forget moments in history when the height of stop, question, and frisk. We tend to forget Diallo. We tend to forget moments in time when we do need robust accountability. But let's look at what we just went through, folks, in the last couple of years. We have a crime wave, not in the streets necessarily, but in the NYPD. And it's not with the cop on the beat. It's at the highest levels. Police commissioners, chiefs, people gaming the system, people not having accountability with the CCRB because they basically gutted the agency. So we need to reform the NYPD, not from the bottom up, but from the top down, and show that we can have that kind of accountability. One last thing. One of the things I was able to do as controller was something called ClaimStat, because we kept seeing the rise of police complaints that was showing that we were paying out large settlements because of wrongdoing. I took a look at all the precincts and identified where the complaints were coming from. And sure enough, our analysis showed that there were some precincts that had very high spikes. So what I did was call the police commissioner and said, I'll make you a deal. Let's share information. I need to know what's going on in the precincts. You need to see my data because you can have the opportunity to find out what's going on. And sure enough, in a couple of years, we were able to reduce claims against the NYPD by 15%, in part because of ClaimStat. We've now perfected data and technology. This is our moment to have a strong CCRB with data that can actually prevent this kind of claims against the city from happening. That will reduce the hundreds of millions of dollars we're paying out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tilson.
Yeah, my answers are yes and yes as well. And I actually think one of the things that most impressed me about Commissioner Tisch was as she is calling for more police officers, putting more police officers out there, enforcing more crimes, putting police in more contact with civilians. As a good manager, she recognized that there needs to be greater accountability, and she has promised to crack down on the number of cases against police officers that have been a large increase under Mayor Adams, the number that are dismissed for statute of limitations, 18 months expired. So she correctly, as a good manager, I think recognizes both greater enforcement and greater activity by police officers needs to be married with greater accountability.
So if we're going to keep the CCRB, then the answer is yes and yes. They should be fully funded and they should be effective, but I don't think that we should keep them. I think we should scrap the system in favor of something completely different that actually provides real accountability, like real accountability, the kind of accountability that only comes from an independent commission that has the teeth to actually prosecute without getting the blessing of the police commissioner or the mayor. And that's why we need, for the first time in city history, a citywide Department of Public Integrity that will take over all policing functions for agencies, including the NYPD, including stripping out internal affairs, right? We need an agency that is accountable to an appointee who is based on merit, who sits for a 10-year term, just like the FBI director, and has the power to not only investigate, but prosecute and punish people in City Hall that are involved in acts of illegality, including police. And so I think that I've spoken to members of the CCRB who said if we had that kind of system, we wouldn't need the CCRB anymore because civilian complaints could go to this independent agency. And if I were the mayor, I would want that agency looking at me and my administration to make sure that all corruption was rooted out. And I'd want them looking at the NYPD as well, with the power to get stuff done and to get people out of the department that don't belong there.
Okay, we're coming down the home stretch again, and so I'm going to ask for a show of hands question and then a brief response, and then we did promise you 1-minute closing statements, and so if everybody's on their game, we can get all of that done. The reason the NYPD currently uses body-worn cameras is that a federal judge required their use in response to past findings of excessive and unlawful racial profiling. However, the public is only able to see footage that the NYPD chooses to disclose, a policy that is much more restrictive than the standards found in other jurisdictions, including Chicago and Las Vegas. So, show of hands, would you as mayor commit to a general policy of releasing body-worn camera footage to the public in a timely manner? Yes from Stringer, Tilson, and Adams. No from Ramos and Walden. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, okay, good. Oh, so yes across the board. Yes across the board. Okay, good. No, not Walden. Walden doesn't want us to see the footage. Okay. Real brief, and
You also have to turn the body cameras on, which is really the root of the problem.
Stop, question, frisk numbers have more than doubled under the Adams administration to over 25,000 per year, compared with just over 13,000 in the pre-pandemic year of 2019. Under Mayor Adams, about 73% of these stops did not result in an arrest or summons. So I'm going to ask each of you, what would you do if a community complained about nuisance behavior, but also insisted that they do not want a heavy-handed police response? We'll start with you, Mr. Walden.
So this is I guess you'll need that. This is a very complicated question to answer in a very pithy way. But the short answer is I would trust my police commissioner with guardrails. But there are communities, and honestly, if you look at the communities that are the most impacted by the places in which crime is increased, it is, show of hands, the Bronx, right? They need smart policing, community-based policing, but there are many people up there, and I've been up there, that want stop, question, and frisk. So there's a balance that has to be struck. And the balance is to get more police officers in the precincts that are actually working with community members and creating a form of it that is transparent and accountable so that we can get ahead of abuses before they start turning into trends, but to keep using that technique, which is bringing down the numbers.
Okay, Mr. Tilson.
Yeah, I agree that there needs to be a balance. Crime is not random. 4% of violent crime, more than 50% of violent crime occurs in about 4% of the city blocks. And one of the techniques that is Commissioner Tisch implemented is focused policing, not generalized policing, in the areas where that are plagued by the highest crime. And that is where police are becoming more aggressive. And I'd like to invert your statistic. You said 73% don't result in an arrest or a summons. That means 27% do. What was your number?
That's right.
Yeah. Back in the bad old days of stop and frisk, a couple decades ago, which I opposed that kind of just broad-based stop and frisk, I think the numbers were, only a few percent, right? Policing today is much more targeted, and the fact that more than a quarter of the people that are being stopped, in fact, it turns out there was a legitimate reason for it, indicates that and the fact that crime is down a lot so far this year indicates that there's a reasonable balance.
And can I just add that when you overlay on that the people in that 27% cohort that actually had open felony warrants or had guns or other kinds of contraband, it does create a reason for having a balanced system where the police are allowed to use all their tools. Sorry.
Mr. Stringer.
Look, we can't talk out of both sides of our mouth. The people over here, we're not getting stopped, questioned, or frisked. That's just the reality. People here get stopped and frisked. But more importantly, my kids, not stopped and frisked. Your grandkids, likely. And that is something that we should do away with. I don't care who the mayor is. You can fight crime. You heard all of our suggestions and our reasoned approaches, more cops, more deterrence. We can get there, New York City. But to go back to a time when grandparents were more afraid of setting their kids out for milk because of a police interaction than actually being involved in an altercation with someone trying to mug them, we should have zero tolerance for this. Stop and frisk has been used to profile people of color. Why would we do that? And I don't think we should. And that's why I was the first person who literally looked like me, who stood up during the bad old days of stop and frisk and said no. And I said it before the court said it was unconstitutional.
That is a lame way to use a race card in a circumstance like this.
Nobody can. Wait.
Dude, I'm just called the way I see it.
Hold on a second, Scott.
Nobody
characterized any of your responses, Jim Walden. So we're gonna do this the way you all agreed to do. Ms. Ramos.
Stop and frisk is unconstitutional. That has been established. And it is a tool that has been used to abuse of the Black and brown and Asian communities in all of the 5 boroughs in New York City. I shared earlier that I'm someone who's been stopped and frisked. I was 19 years old. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. I was walking down Roosevelt Avenue coming from Manhattan with my girlfriends, and the NYPD decided that it was a great opportunity to stop, not question, and emphasis on the frisk. They really just wanted to touch us. And I cannot tell you how traumatizing and life-changing that experience is for the 73% of people that have to bear the brunt of figuring out the other 27%. That is not right at all. And you are unfit to be our mayor if you think so. I will say that that pre-pandemic, we were the safest city in this country. when stop and frisk was on a decline. And so there are a myriad of other tools that can and should be used in order for us to deduce where there is a propensity of crime taking place. But right now we are focused in the short-term knee-jerk reactions and not the long-term targeting of actual bad actors that are leading crime rings and syndicates that allow for the exploitation of people, and particularly women and immigrants. I'm tired of that narrative.
Ms. Adams.
You know, I'm sitting here trying to keep my composure as I completely agree with the senator and with Scott Stringer on this. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. And there is not a single day that I don't wake up in the morning feeling the pressure on my family coming from a Black community, coming from the Rockaways, coming from Jamaica, coming from Southeast Queens. We know what this is. We know what it means. You cannot polish this away to make it look like a lower percentage. What it is taking advantage of the underserved and people that have been disproportionately targeted because of stop, question, and frisk. It is unconstitutional. It is against the law. We're not supposed to be doing this anymore. And the facts bear out, the stats bear out. The small percentages that you get folks on this horrible tactic, it is not worth the weight that it is giving and the trauma that it produces because of the weight that it carries in Black and brown communities and Asian communities. We shouldn't be doing this.
Errol, am I going to get some rebuttal time here?
Not a lot, because we're up to our concluding statements, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, okay. So there are constitutional standards.
This is your closing statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
But wait a second.
No, you don't get to rebut.
Okay.
You don't get to rebut after the outburst. We're not going to do that. You're going to give your closing statement, and then we'll be done.
Okay. I don't know what you mean by outburst, but I'll use my closing statement for this. There are constitutional standards. As a lawyer and a former prosecutor, I know this. There are constitutional standards for when police are allowed to approach, question, and then based on the questioning to frisk. They're embedded in the Constitution. They've been in our Constitution since 1966. What happened in the last administration with that stop and frisk program violated those standards. And I believed in that, and I believe in that now, that those standards were violated. However, it's a false choice to say that we can't, because the Supreme Court has said under Terry that you can stop, question, and based on the probable cause that may come, or the reasonable suspicion that may come from a questioning, then proceed to a frisk. That's the state of the law. There's nothing unconstitutional about that. I agree that there was racial profiling based on the old policy, but to say that we have to scrap that, rather than improve it, is a false choice. I don't believe in false choices.
Okay. Mr. Tilson, your closing statement.
Sure. Since this is a forum around reducing crime and all, and policing, let me just summarize what good management looks like of this system. Number one, we have to recruit, train, and retain officers. And if my police commissioner, for example, recommends Cop City, which everyone else seems to be opposed to, if Jessica Tisch tells me Cop City is necessary for that, I will support it. Secondly, we need to have enough police officers. We're down to a 34-year low. And as I've said, and I think there's some agreement anyway, that we need to increase that number. Thirdly, we need to lead them well, and thank goodness we have good management and leadership that has rooted out the corruption at the top under Mayor Adams. And then perhaps more controversially, we should let them do their job, which is identify and arrest criminals, and not just the most serious felonies, but lower level crimes as well, because that contributes to deteriorating quality of life and more higher level crimes. Second to last, we need to when cops do their jobs, there need to be consequences. They need to be supported by a criminal justice system. We need to reform the bail reform law, the discovery reform law in particular. And lastly, there needs to be accountability to weed out the bad apples, so that the vast majority of cops who are doing good work protecting our communities are not tainted by those bad apples.
Mr. Stringer.
First of all, Errol, Vital City, Roosevelt House, thank you for giving us this great opportunity to exchange ideas, especially when it comes to criminal justice issues. It was certainly a lively and I think important debate. Look, as I mentioned when we started, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, growing up back in the day, and I'm really excited to raise my two kids. They're public school kids. They're the joy of my life. My wife and I are very hopeful for this city. But I'm running because I think I have a skill set that could make a difference in the city because of my experience in the state legislature, as borough president working on housing issues, as controller managing the fourth largest pension fund for 8 years successfully in America. I believe that I have the skills not just to pay the bills, but also to reform a government that has collapsed almost agency by agency. This is not going to be an easy journey the next 4 years. We're going to have to break eggs, and we're going to also have to attract the best and the brightest to government. We're going to have a clarion call, everybody come from the private sector, the public sector, and rebuild our city on so many issues: housing, education, criminal justice. I have no problem putting a forward-thinking police plan to the voters of this city, which I have done, that says we will keep you safe. We will continue the New York Compact with people from all over the world who come here, people who were raised here, and say to them, be our entrepreneurs, be the people raising our families. We will make sure that this city is safe, that our parks are clean, that our streets are not full of garbage and rats. We can have a mayor who can focus on the day-to-day, but also not be a minimalist. Think about the big ideas on housing and education and healthcare. And that's what I want to do for the next 4 years, because my legacy as a New Yorker means that I have to have skin in the game and work to make the city better, just like all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
New Yorkers have less than 90 days to think about who the next person will be to lead our city. All of the expert leaders of the past who relied solely on reporting and data and not an actual lived experience as a New Yorker who is born, raised, and raising children in this great city have been able to create the sustainable and lasting change that our communities deserve. It's why there is an expertise that is needed, but there is also an ability to understand the pain that New Yorkers have been going through for decades in a city that has become more unlivable because it is less affordable and there is less opportunity in our streets and in our economic sectors. We have to elect a mayor that can fundamentally shift the paradigm in this city to make sure that those who have been excluded from those opportunities finally have the advantage to thrive in New York City. I'm asking you to elect me on June 24th so that we can finally put forth a city that is inclusive of every single person that lives in every corner of our 5 boroughs, so that we can leave our divisive nature in the past and actually move forward to create an economy that is sustainable for everyone by shifting our focus to a care economy, to a union climate economy, to affordable housing, and making sure that every single person in New York City is truly safe in every sense of the word, making sure that every single generation of New Yorkers is safer than the last. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vital City, Roosevelt, for having us. Thank you, Errol. Thank you, team. Brigid, thank you so much. You know, I sit here, and this has been such a wonderful conversation today. But whenever I sit in these forums, I always think about my family. I keep saying I'm the first wife, mother, grandmother, who has ever led the city council as the first Black speaker of the New York City Council, feeling my constituents, because having lived the lives of my constituents, there is something very, very different in the way that I am running this race to be mayor, to be the first woman mayor of the city of New York, the first person, the only candidate here who has successfully negotiated 3 city budgets, now in the 4th city budget, have walked up those steps of City Hall for almost a decade, have led a body of 50 members that some folks say could never reach consensus, but because of my managerial skills prior to becoming an elected official, was able to bring those skills in to my political life, able to organize and bring consensus, able to override at least 3 vetoes that this mayor saw fit to bring before this legislative body. We overrode them with a supermajority each time. So I have already been there doing the work, stepping up to lead where this mayor has refused to lead. I have not brought this city any scandal, any corruption, any embarrassment. I bring experience of a leader from one side of City Hall just needing to be moved over to the other side of City Hall to do this work the way that this work needs to be done, the way that New Yorkers need to be led, the way that New Yorkers need to be changed. New York is looking for a change. I'm tired, we're tired of the trauma and the drama. I bring to you no drama, no scandal, just competency and integrity to be the mayor, the first woman mayor of the city of New York. Thank you.
Okay, that is going to be the last word. On behalf of Vital City and the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY, I want to thank all of the candidates for joining us here at Roosevelt House. A thank you to the audience for watching. Watch for a video of this event at vitalcitynyc.org and on Vital City's feeds on X and Blue Sky. Everybody have a great day. Group photo.